What's going on? This is Kex Next, and today I'm going to show you how you can create a really cool looking scene in After Effects with subsurface scattering in Element 3D. And I actually saw something pretty similar to this on videocopilot.com. So right here you can kind of see it. Really nice looking, has like this kind of looking flare over here. It's a ramp. The only problem is that he used a texture from Video Copilot's Pro Shaders, the original Pro Shaders pack, which I don't have. I only have Pro Shaders 2. And I tried to recreate this texture for free inside of After Effects. I was going to show you how to do that, but it didn't turn out too well. So instead of using the texture, I'll just show you how to make that scene without, the lizard skin texture. So let's get started. So create a new composition with Command N, or you press the composition button over here, and we'll call this Blobs. 1920 by 1080 is fine. Hit OK. Then you want to create a new solid. So Command Y, or you can right click and hit Layer New Solid, but I'm going to use Command Y or Control Y on Windows. I'm going to call this E3D and hit Enter. And then we're going to right click over here in the Effect Controls, go down to Video Copilot and Element. And then you're going to go into the Scene Setup and rotate around. Maybe turn off Draft Textures. I really hate Draft Textures. It's just annoying. I don't really see any use for it unless your computer's not, very powerful. But other than that, I don't know. Anyways, so let's create a new sphere. Once we have that, we're going to turn up the radius to 2, maybe 1.5. Turn up the segments to 20, and you can kind of see if I go into a wireframe, kind of see what that did. It went from 6 to 20, which just increases the number of faces in the sphere. And that's what we want because we're going to be deforming the sphere, so we want some more faces to be able to do that. Another thing we want to do is go into the surface option, so this little button right here, and where it says normals, change that to dynamic, and click optimize mesh. And we're probably good there. We're going to switch this back to shaded. Now we want to apply a texture, so go to presets, go to physical, and apply a black gloss. And then you can twirl down this little arrow right here, go to the material, and scroll down and pick a color that you really like. Personally, I like the orange one, kind of like this reddish orange color. Yeah, right there. And I click OK. That looks pretty good. Maybe turn down the glossiness. So yeah, 75 is fine. And now you want to hit this little button that says SSS, and that of course stands for Subsurface Scattering. This kind of makes it look like there's light passing through the object, or the light kind of absorbs, or the object kind of absorbs light. And so to see this really well, we're going to go to the single light, click it, and go to SSS. And this is just a lighting preset that allows you to see subsurface scattering pretty well. So we're going to enable it, and already you can kind of see it. It doesn't look that great, but we're going to mess around with some of the settings. So the scatter color, maybe keep that at white, unless you're going to do some creative stuff with it, in which case you can change it to the color of the sphere and make it glow a little bit, but we're just going to look at subsurface scattering in this tutorial. So maybe turn up the scatter amount, maybe not, maybe turn up the intensity, and then maybe turn up the amount just a little bit. Maybe mess around with the absorption fall off. And that looks pretty good. I wish, Element 3D doesn't do this, but I wish at the front of the sphere that it would also kind of be semi, like translucent kind of, but it's not, so. But that's okay. We're just going to be kind of working from the back of the sphere. So once you have this set up, you're going to press OK. And you're going to create a new camera. And I always use the shortcut, which is Alt-Shift-Command-C, but I know that's a little too much for some people to remember. So you can go to Layer, New, and Camera. And then here, make it 20 millimeters and 2 node and hit OK. You want to change the resolution of your composition to half. Go into Element 3D and change this to Preview. And go to the camera and hit AA on the keyboard and turn off depth of field. Next thing we want to do is go to Element 3D, go to Group 1, go down to Particle Replicator, and change this to 3D Grid. And then increase the shape scale. And if you hit C on the keyboard, it'll bring up your unified camera tool and you just kind of orbit around this. Kind of bring up the shape scale a little bit more. And then go down to Replicator Effects, Scatter, and turn up the scatter amount a lot. So shift and then just move that value. You want these things to just be everywhere. And you can also control the individual the scatter on individual axes, so play around with that. And then you can also go to the position noise down here and just kind of play around with that. If you really just kind of do this, it just affects the position of your particles. Kind of looks like I don't know, like atoms or something like that. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to use position noise though, so I'm just going to turn that off. And then I'm going to hit C on the keyboard again, if you don't already have the camera tool selected, and you're going to find a random sphere that you kind of like. This one looks fine because it's kind of odd one out, And this lighting is really gross. There's, some subsurface scattering, but there's not a lot. So we're going to hit V on the keyboard to bring up the cursor tool. And we're going to close up our bottom layer, and we're going to create a new light. So hit Layer, New Light. And we're going to use this light to control the amount of subsurface scattering. And by the way, you have to have cast shadows on to do this. So let's just call this, light 1's fine. And we're going to make it a spotlight and change the color to white. Hit OK. The intensity is 100, and you can just kind of turn that cone angle up a little bit, and the cone feather, leave that at 100, and hit OK. And then we're going to twirl down the little arrow, go to Transform, and we're going to mess around with the orientation of the light. So it's the orientation and the position's pretty important, so we're going to mess around with both of those. So I'm just going to kind of move this light back. And we're going to increase the cone angle and the intensity to about 120. And maybe mess around with the orientation just a little bit more. Also, make sure you move the light into a position where the sphere that you selected, it's kind of shining on that sphere, because that's the kind of main focus of the scene. So you're going to want this light to be shining on the sphere. That looks pretty nice. And now we're going to actually go into Element 3D, go to the scene setup, and turn down the glossiness a lot. I just really don't like that. So go up to the basic settings and just turn down that glossiness. And hit OK. Yeah, that's better. I don't know. If we're going to deform it, I think the glossiness might look pretty good, but other than that, I don't know. Just play around with it until you get something that you like. Really, it's all fine. But anyways, we want to mess with the deformation of the spheres now. So go into Particle Look in Group 1. Go to Deform. Make sure it's enabled. And go to Noise and turn that on. And then we can go to the Intensity and turn the intensity up. And already we get this kind of wild looking globule of a sphere. And we can turn the scale up or down, whatever's best for your scene. Those look pretty good. Yeah. That looks pretty good. And once we have that done, we can just twirl up the arrow for Group 1. Go to Render Settings. Go to Physical Environment. And Lighting Influence. Actually, no, keep that the same. Go to Exposure and turn this to 0. That'll give you this really cool kind of like shaded look, and I don't know, I think that looks really awesome. For lighting, make sure that's none. If you go to subsurface scattering, this is what we want, and we just want to kind of mess around with some of the settings in this. When render mode is on preview, it does not, automatically turn down the amount of sub SSS samples that element is rendering. So it'll be really tough on your computer, even if your render mode is in preview. So make sure you keep up with the amount of samples that subsurface scattering is using. So for the final render, we want to make sure this is 20 or even higher if you have like a bigger resolution image. But for right now, we want to use 8 because we're just messing around with it right now. In here, you can mess around with the intensity if you didn't like what you chose within Element 3D, so you don't have to keep going back and forth, which is pretty nice. You can create some really cool looking things in here, some abstract art or something, but I kind of like it at 100. Maybe turn up the scattering amount, because now now that you have kind of like a bigger, wilder particle. The absorption, just kind of mess around with some of these. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And then you can go into the ambient occlusion and enable it and change this to 5. Then you can close that up. Go to let's go to glow and see what that looks like. We're going to enable it, and where it says glow from, change that to luminance. And this is just going to add a little bit of glow on the hot spots of our image. So we want to turn the intensity down to like 1 or something like that, and turn the glow radius up, because the bigger your glow radius is, it usually means the closer the camera is to something, or the smaller something is if it has a large glow radius. But if the glow radius is very small, it means that these things are like massive. So we want to make it pretty large if you're thinking this is really small particles or something like that. I don't know. I don't know if I really like the glow on this. We'll come back to that. But right now we want to create a background. So use Command Y or Control Y on Windows and call this BG for background. And we're going to move it under the Element 3D layer. And then we're going to right click, go to Generate, and go to Gradient Ramp. Change this to Radial Ramp, hit Swap Colors, and we're going to move this to where we've positioned our light. So that should be right there. Keep in mind you're going to have to keyframe the position of this if you have your camera move or something like that, so the position of the ramp kind of stays with the light in the scene. Probably use some expressions or something, but this is just an image, so we're going to mess around with some of the colors. So for the white color, we're going to make this kind of a lighter orange, so it's a little bit lighter than the orange in our scene. And then we're going to go to the end of ramp value, which is down here, and we just got to kind of move it until you just have those dark edges at the edge of your image. So it looks pretty good. Maybe turn the darkness of the ramp down, and then the lightness of the color up a little bit. So right there is pretty good. It's like a brownish color. And we're just going to kind of position this ramp a little bit like that. And that looks pretty good. Now we want to enable a depth of field. So go to the camera, hit AA, go to depth of field and turn that on. And then we're going to go to the aperture and turn this up to, let's say, 85. We want it to be a really high value. We want a lot of blur in this image. Maybe like 100 and let's do 145. Yeah. And we're going to turn the focus distance way down. So we're going to set this to 100 firstly, and we'll probably have a very blurred image. And we're just going to kind of manually increase it until we get to that first blob. So that was a little too much. So if we play around with this, it'll get real pixelized, and that's what we want, so we can kind of see what we're doing. So right there. That looks awesome. Maybe we can even turn up the aperture a little bit more, so make this 175. Nah, that's too much. Maybe turn it down to like 120. That's pretty good. And if you want to mess around with the blur level, you can. So maybe you can turn this down if you want. Just kind of mess around with this. I think that looks pretty cool. Maybe change this to like 65. Yeah, that's awesome. But anyways, now we want to add sort of like a flare type thing. So this is only if you have optical flares from Video Copilot. If you don't, there's plenty of tutorials online on how to make, a specific flare. Now, if you're going to do a flare out in the open like this, I highly recommend you get optical flares from Video Copilot. But if we were to shift our camera angle so that the light is kind of behind our main globule, we could create some kind of volumetric looking light. So to do that, we're going to create a new solid. So Command Y or Control Y on Windows, and we'll call this vol for volumetric light. And we'll put this below our Element 3D layer. Then we're going to apply an effect. So come over here to the effects from presets and let it load up for a second. And you want to type in circle. And where it's under generate, and just kind of drag that onto vol. And if I kind of move this, you can kind of see we have a white circle now, and it's behind our Element 3D layer because that's where we've placed it. And we just kind of want to increase the radius and go into the feather settings and just turn that way up. Like way up. Maybe turn down the radius. Then you can hit T on the keyboard to bring up the opacity settings and just kind of turn that down a bit. So maybe like 75. And then you're going to apply a curves adjustment. So go to color correction and curves. And then where it says channel, go to alpha. And just kind of play around with the alpha channel just a bit. Maybe turn it up. And if you add some contrast in it, it's more like a flare type thing. I think that looks pretty awesome. Maybe even turn down the radius of the actual circle itself. Yeah. And maybe turn up the opacity. No, not that high. It looks pretty good. Yeah. So, but if you have optical flares, I'm going to show you, I'm going to just turn off this layer really quick and go to C and just kind of move it like that. If you have optical flares, I'll show you how to do that right now. So hit Command Y or Control Y on Windows and call this flare. And hit enter. We're going to move it above everything else. And then we're going to right click, go down to Video Copilot and hit optical flares. And click on options. And you can just, go to the lens objects in your browser and click on glow. Actually, you know what? If we go to preset browser and go to custom objects, hit anamorphic spots small, then go to lens objects and hit glow, and just delete this multi-iris right here. So once you have this glow, you can change the global color to a more white color and hit OK, and hit OK again. And make sure you hit F4 on your keyboard so you bring up the blending modes, and you want to change this blending mode to screen and position it where your light should be. And also another thing you might want to do is go to the glow settings, and where it says aspect ratio, change that to 2.36 and hit OK. Then you just really want to turn the brightness down, maybe the scale down and then the brightness up. And that looks pretty good. If you want to add a tint to it, you can with the color mode and just kind of add a cool looking tint to it. Maybe if it was like a red flare. Maybe if it was like a red flare or something like that, look pretty cool. Maybe like the yellowish orange kind of color. Like golden light. I think that looked pretty cool, but I think I'm gonna keep it. No, you know what? That looks pretty cool. I'm gonna keep it like that. So now I want to right click and go to color correction and curves. And you just kind of play around with the curves adjustment. If you bring it up, it's going to be more like hazy in your scene. But bring it down and it'll be more like a soft flare. Ugh. So I'm going to make it a little bit more hazy. I think that looks pretty good. One thing you want to do now is go to Element 3D, go to Subsurface Scattering, and change these samples to 20. And then change the render mode to full and the resolution to full. Just wait a second for this to render. It might take a little while if your computer's a little bit more slow, but that's okay. And once we have this, we're going to create another new composition. So Command N or Control N on Windows. We're going to call this Final and hit Enter. And then we just want to kind of drag in our blobs composition. So mine's right here. And we're going to add some black bars. So we're going to hit Command Y or Control Y on Windows. And we're going to change the height. Make sure you're on 1920 by 1080 though for your first comp. If it's not, I'm sure you could go and find the actual resolutions for this. But if you're on 1920 by 1080, change the height to 813. And this will give you an anamorphic aspect ratio, specifically the 2.36 aspect ratio that we made our flare. So, hit Enter, and create another new solid with Command Y or Control Y on Windows. Hit Make Comp Size and hit OK. The black solid that we just created, the last one, we want to move that under the first one, and change the track matte to Alpha Inverted Matte. And that will give us some nice black bars. If you want, you can go to the Blobs comp and hit P on the keyboard to bring up the position, and just kind of play around with the Y position, and find something that you like. I think that's kind of cool. That flare just looks a little too prominent to me. Looks a little too more like it's kind of like banding light around it. I'm not sure I really like that, so maybe you could go back to it. I saw when it was white, there was none of that banding light. I think that's just the color, the tint issue. Maybe make it like slightly orange. So this is where you want to apply any color correction. So if you go to your Blobs comp and right click and go to color correction, you can apply a curves effect and just mess around with your comp. You can really create some fun looks in here. Do a little bit more contrasty. And you can go ahead and maybe you could change the color of the flare to blue or something like that, or maybe greenish. You really just get in there and play around with whatever you got. This looks really awesome. I really like this. It has like some really nice subsurface scattering in here, and since we turned up the samples, it looks really good. We have a good flare. But you know, play around with some of the things that are in this tutorial. Like, I was playing around with this and I was able to create this image, which I am using for my wallpaper right now. I just love this. It has a lot of glow on it, and I turned the aspect ratio of the glow so that it's like streaks. I don't know. I just play around with, you know, these methods and just find something that you really like. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, please subscribe, please leave a comment down below saying, you know, what you want to see in a later tutorial. And if you dislike this video, please leave a comment telling me why you dislike it, and I'll try to change that in a later video. Thank you so much for watching. I am KexNext, and I will see you next time.